Much better, much better.
Yeah. What's
Good
up? Hey, how you guys doing? Happy
afternoon.
Saturday. Good afternoon. This is your best case scenario podcast. I am friend of the people, Robert Kelly, and this is
D. Johnson as always.
all right. Mucho gusto.
Indeed, indeed.
All right.
Go
Today
get
we're going to be talking about two important and related topics.
yes, sir.
Top
Yes,
of the
sir.
show, talking about Hong Kong, the protests that have been continuing since March. And then we're going to go into some of the effects on the United States and their business. So we'll just dive right into it. We have an hour. We're going to try to fill that up for you with some fun, excitement. Go ahead and like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. You know what I mean? Whatever. Talk about my mama. Best mama joke. We'll find something. We'll do something. Send you something or something like that. Okay. So first of
Send you
all,
an envelope full of glitter.
yes. It's like, I don't know. It sounds like an anthrax threat to me.
You know.
But okay, so first of all, for you guys that may not know, here in the United States, there are protests that have been going on, months-long protests in Hong Kong, and the protest is called the Anti-Extradition Law Amendment Bill Movement, or the ELAB movement. ELAB movement, it stemmed out of a law that would allow local authorities to extradite and detain criminal fugitives from China, Taiwan, and other places that Hong Kong did not have extradition orders with at this point in time. Now, the Hong Kong government currently does not have any extradition at all with these governments, and the people, when this bill was introduced, they took exception to it. The reason being, they don't believe, because they are fighting for a more democratic government, and a place like China or Taiwan where they have a lot of restrictions in terms of laws.
Mhm.
Could you imagine if you break a law that's maybe a law in China, but it's
Right.
not, and you run to Hong Kong,
Right. Where it's
and
not the
then
same.
where it's not against the law,
Right.
or something that they're fighting for, then you have to extradite that person back to China.
Mhm.
And so they feel like it would allow the laws of the Chinese hegemon to begin to infiltrate the Hong Kong's like cultural influence.
Yeah.
And they are all about fighting against Chinese cultural influence ever since
Understandably
they've
so.
gotten their independence.
Because they want their independence. They want to keep their independence, and that's fair enough to be said. It's ironic that you say that, because China does not, however, feel that it doesn't feel that Hong Kong is independent. They feel like they own Hong Kong.
Right. Well, yes.
It's very, very interesting.
Part of Chinese foreign policy is that they want to bring a unified China. They are in the process of trying to get Taiwan back.
Yeah.
They've got to be thinking the same thing about Hong Kong, other very valuable assets that were once part of China,
right?
That were taken away through European spheres of influence, things of that nature. They must feel on one level or another, that
it's time to get our stuff back.
It's time to get their stuff back.
Sort of like how, like Putin felt the same way about Crimea. So, I mean, you can understand. I understand the Chinese point of view, but understandably, Hong Kong being an independent nation, understandably would rile people, because you can start. You know what I mean? You can imagine the people that were championing independence. You can imagine that they'll probably be the first people targeted for that if there's an extradition law, because they broke the law against the Chinese. So. Right. Real good fight to have. If nothing else, it's something worth fighting for, especially in light of, as we well know, the Chinese method of taking care of home and state.
So let's talk about how it all started. The protest began in March, but got caught on into a mass movement in June.
Remember that?
Okay, the huge protest against the bill started on June the 9th. With hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, citizens of Hong Kong, against the law, that the anti-extradition law. Okay, Carrie Lam, who is the chief executive of Hong Kong, vowed to push ahead with the bill in spite of its unpopularity with the people. And then on June 12th, violence erupted as the bill was read in the legislative council. So, but police showed up in force. They used rubber bullets, they used tear gas and other crowd control tactics to repel the protesters. The protesters were successful, however, in delaying the reading of the bill. So they had canceled the session, and then they agreed not to address the bill at that time. Since their time, there has been escalating violence. Now, Carrie Lam has agreed to actually not propose the bill any longer.
Good.
So that's one victory on the level for the protesters.
Because it was getting really dicey when you started to see the Chinese military hitting the streets. That was where it started to be. It reminds you, of Tiananmen Square, things of that nature, and dark times in history where the voice couldn't be heard, and that's something you want to champion for anybody. Like it's worth fighting for, to be able to have your voice heard. You know what I mean? Anyway,
right. So basically, at that time, what the protesters did though is they actually expanded their demands because they had a movement that was going on. Why not take advantage, right? That's how I feel.
Well, it comes down to a simple tenet too. Like you always want to, you definitely never want to have laws that are introduced that don't make it fair for everyone involved. That looks like what it was going to not be. You know what I mean? Like honestly, it looked like that's really what it was going to not be. And like I said before, when you saw the Chinese government deploy troops to a free country, you know what I'm saying? It's a little nerve wracking when you start thinking about the people's right to speak,
right?
Especially in a country that's a communist country instead of a capitalist country. You usually see that kind of thing here because they don't like to see any movements that would cause people to lose money. But the Chinese were are still very adamant about not having it happen there.
Right. So since that June 12th, first initial mass protest, there's been escalating violence and protesting, and there have been reports that the police have used brutal tactics, including firing live ammunition at this point at the protesters.
Yeah.
So let's see what the demands of the protesters are. Number one was a full withdrawal of the extradition bill, which actually came to pass. They also want a retraction of the characterization of the protest from riots to a protest. Because when you characterize something to the rest of the world as a riot, what happens is that sounds a lot different than a protest.
Well, the way they were making them sound is that they were, there's video evidence that they did take to the streets with a little bit of violence, but sometimes you gotta have it to get your voice heard. But it wasn't the kind of protest where they were, rioting and looting, and there was no extensive buildings burned to the ground. There was none of that, so I can understand them wanting that retraction because you don't want the facts mired down with sensational.
Well, I'm not necessarily of the school that violence, like protests, should be anti-violent. It's still a protest even if you're violent.
Yeah.
And sometimes violence is sometimes necessary in protesting. Now, what we have here, from what I understand, is that the vast majority of the protesters are not violent.
Yes.
There is certain factions of protesters that are doing the things like gas bombs and things of that nature, right? Now, those two groups,
you have those fanatics with any group. You know what I mean?
And those two groups of people, though, they are united in solidarity, as in they don't speak ill of one another.
That part.
And that's what's the important thing. But when you're facing in your own country against police that are being violent towards you, and some up into firing live ammo, then there's nothing. Who is to say that is where you're not supposed to at that point use violence?
Yeah.
To rebut, you know what I mean? They're using violence against you.
Well, the one thing that I'm sorry, y'all. But the one thing that I did take out of the information that I'm seeing that throughout the entire time that it's ratcheted up, if you will, like as these protests are ramped up, is that they're being heard. And kudos to them for sticking to it. You know what I mean? Kudos for them for not giving up on that. Right. They stuck to it.
So but the only thing Carrie Lam has said that the only thing she's going to do is the full withdrawal of the extradition bill, which she did on September 4th all the way. But then, of course, retraction of the characterization of the protest. Also, they want an exoneration of arrested protesters.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so there's people that are in jail right now. As far as these protests are concerned, they want a full exoneration. And another thing that they want is an independent commission of inquiry into police brutality, police behavior. So they want an independent investigation into some of the brutality that the police have done against the protesters. I've seen a video. It was a video from the London. No, it was actually the Prince Edward station in Hong Kong. Prince Edward Station in Hong Kong. It's a subway station, and how the police hounded not only protesters but innocent people by opening the doors, came in just gangbusters, hitting people with batons. Not only people that was safe was the press. You had a camera,
you had your press pass, you was getting your head busted.
But then there's reports that severe violence that had resulted in deaths of certain young people in that incident, because but there's no way of knowing, because they kicked the press out of the subway area for up to 2 hours.
Wow.
Right. So they kicked this, and then they didn't. But there have been reports of people that were seen hurt at the scene, not being able to be followed up on. Nobody in their family, you know what I mean?
Were they able to
missing,
have, like,
just kind of like missing.
Oh, just black, just black back.
Yeah, just missing people. Not arrested, not anything like that. Just where are they?
But I mean, it got to crack some eggs to make an omelet. You know what I mean? So. But they do deserve to be exonerated for it, because if you're going to retract the whole law, you know what I mean? You got to free the people that were fighting for that cause anyway. And other than that, you create political prisoners that are going to make this problem worse than actually fixing it, which is what I think Carrie Lam is trying to do.
Now, another thing that they're fighting for is universal suffrage for legislative council and chief executive elections. Because in Hong Kong, the way that they choose their leadership, there is an election council of 1,500 members. And these 1,500 members, they choose who runs the government. There are very small provinces where people actually vote in democratic elections for certain members of this national council. But by and large, the leadership of Hong Kong is not a democrat. It's not a democratic state. There is no election. It's more of a parliamentary oligarchy.
Sounds a lot like electoral colleges.
No, well, at least when you vote, it goes in, and the delegates are distributed by who wins the electoral college. It's winner take all. It's winner take all in there, not theirs. Theirs is
eerily sounds like
this one group of people.
Colleges.
There's no one has any say. You could, like, if I'm one of the 1,500, nobody has a say over where my
vote is going to go.
Where my vote goes. Fair, right.
So
it's a process totally detached from democracy.
Yeah.
And so they are fighting for universal suffrage, meaning everyone in the country that's a citizen gets a chance to vote on their elected official, on who represents them, and they get to vote for their executive director, who is now Carrie Lam. And their final is they're actually calling for the resignation of Carrie Lam in the face of these protests. So it's a very terrible situation, because what's going on now is the police have gone up a notch in terms of their violence, aggression, right? And then not only that, now the Hong Kong government is passing certain laws like no mask laws and things of that nature that protect the identity of the protesters, things of that nature. So we have to keep up with this as it keeps going. I personally, when you're talking about spreading democracy, things of that nature, I when I look at the videos and things that what's going on over there in Hong Kong, I have much admiration for the people of Hong Kong.
Right.
When they talk to the people, you can just tell there's a different level of education there. That these people have a different level of commitment to things like universal suffrage or no extradition. Things that in the United States, we would protest against, but our protests look a lot different. These are literally hundreds of thousands of people, sometimes even 700,000 to 800,000 people.
Yeah.
And so these protests are humongous, and they are,
well organized. They're
Well, they're not. They don't have any real leadership organization.
Well, no, it's that they're organizing their mission of what they're trying to get accomplished.
Yeah.
Like you won't see them. Like I've watched a lot of the demonstrations when they go a little sideways, or what the media is trying to pump is look what they're doing. But even then, it's not like they're taking this. They're not taking the anger anywhere else but to the parliament. They're not taking it anywhere but to.
There's literally people that are watching the protests on the sidelines while it's happening.
Right, they're they're taking it to the people that are affecting the change, so they can make sure their voices heard.
It's not like a ballroom blitz.
Yeah, it's very. That's what I'm saying. Like when you look at it, that's why you had Carrie Lam even before say, "Hey, you know what? Look, I didn't say some of the things that I said, or I was taken out of context because these aren't uneducated people. They've been colonized by the British. They fought for their independence from them as well as from China. So
Hong Kong has one of the best Hi, Maddie. Hong Kong has one of the greatest educational systems in the world. First of all,
I see you, Ty. We ain't there yet, but we're gonna talk about that too. But yeah, go ahead. Like you said, they have one of the best education systems.
Right. They have one of the best education systems in the world, and so when you're talking about, and that is one of education is the enemy of authoritarian government.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
And that's why when you see authoritarians get into office, one of the things that they want to do is they want to slash education.
Oh yeah,
they want to prevent.
You got to keep your people
from
being able to formulate ideas and ask questions.
Absolutely,
you're going to because that's how revolutions start.
And that's my point always that I make when we're talking about something like freedom of press or freedom of speech,
right?
Or, freedom
of privacy,
right? And if you're going to give people the freedom of speech, then you have to make education. You have to make education a fundamental right, not just paramount, not just a priority. It has to be a right. Everyone has to have a right to an education in a country where you have freedom of speech.
That's right.
Because if I'm going to articulate my ideas at the highest level that my brain can do, I'm going to need to be educated.
Well, you need that coach. You need to have your brain. What is it? You need to have You need to have that muscle exercise. You need to have that brain, that gray matter wrinkled. You can't just have You can't lead stupid. Blind can't lead blind. You know what I mean? I guess that's the better way to say it. Because I don't want to say anybody's stupid. It's just a lack of education will make people unaware of what they need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I can't read and I can't take in ideas from different places, if I can't participate in the free exchange of ideas, if I can't write a letter or a book, if I can't do those things, then my freedom of speech is being hindered at that time.
Yeah.
Because you are taking away from my potential.
Right. You can't articulate what you want to say, no matter what the situation is. Or I see what you're saying. No matter what the language is, though, if you can't read, fundamentally, if you keep
speak English and spelled English wrong.
I'd bypass that. I got you.
Much love.
But one of the things that I've always opined about any government that is trying to strip away any inalienable right. Let's call it an inalienable right. Let's talk about those for a second. When you talk about telling somebody that they can't wear a mask, that's one, you're taking away the freedom of choice, and then you're taking away the freedom of privacy.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that in regimes very like China or like a North Korea, where you don't have any say in your own day-to-day affairs. Mm-hmm. In countries that scream for freedom with an educated people that understand what freedom is. They're inevitably going to fight against that. So
and not only that, in Hong Kong, what's going on is that say you're a protester, because there's been thousands of protesters that have been injured,
mm-hmm.
and they're arresting them at the hospitals. And what they're doing in order to do that, what they're saying is that they're infringing on their medical privacy rights in order to find out who these people are and then to take them into custody, and which is a travesty.
I mean, it's horrible on a lot of different levels. The violation of the Hippocratic Oath, not even against the doctors, but against the police, because you can't. I mean, how do you identify who's there? Like, how do you tell the difference between somebody who is in the hosptal for, let's say, a routine checkup, and they're there because they got a broken arm in a protest? You know what I mean?
Right. You're absolutely right, Tyrone. If you wear a mask, then the government can't torture from protesting. One day, these protests are going to be over. There may be a resolution one way or the other. And you don't want to get the ire of the state because you're one of the people that helped bring forth something in a protest. Like if we were protesting for some kind of rights, but then they give us what we want, but they identify the people and say, okay, now I'm going to go into these people, homes or into these people's lives, and we're going to destroy them. Yeah, you got y'all got freedom.
You got your freedom,
universal
and we're coming
suffrage.
for you.
You got universal suffrage, but you're not
gonna
vote.
suffer. But no, you're gonna suffer though.
Another big thing that we have to talk about is suicides. There have been 8 suicides since the beginning of this protest. The suicides are from jumping off of buildings. People literally jumping off of buildings in protest of these extradition laws. And so the protesters themselves are fully committed to seeing this through. So I don't know. It's a lot of tough. It's tough, man.
I don't know if I'm jumping off the buildings for any cause, but passion breeds change. I guess that's all I can say. Like, because they're getting results. They are getting results. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, some of the greatest. What do you call it? Some of the greatest leaders of our time have said, if you can't, you got to shed blood sometimes. Sometimes you have to. So, I mean, while the suicides are sad to hear, they are getting a result. So those people didn't die in vain. I guess you could put it that if you want to give that a cause, if you want to champion their cause. But I always say anybody that's having suicidal thoughts should reach out to somebody and let them know what's going on.
I don't think these were like from suicidal thoughts. Like for instance,
that's what I'm saying. Anybody, if you ever have a problem or you feel suicidal and you need someone to talk to, find someone to talk to. That's just my piece on suicide.
And this is from Wikipedia, as far as they're following the protests and their and talking about suicides. That there were 8 suicide cases linked to anti-extradition bill protests. In 5 suicide cases, the victims left suicide notes citing the bill as the reason they took their lives, and 3 were to be attributed to events that follow the extradition bill. One note even stated, "What Hong Kong needs is a revolution." The first suicide took place on June 15th when a 35-year-old man, Marco Leong Ling, climbed the elevated podium on the rooftop of Pacific Place, a shopping center in Admiralty. So that's Admiralty is a place in Hong Kong. At 4:30 p.m., wearing a yellow raincoat with the words "Brutal police are cold-blooded" and "Carrie Lam is killing Hong Kong" in Chinese written on the back. He hung a banner on the scaffolding with several anti-extradition slogans. After a 5-hour standoff, during which the police officers and the Democratic Party legislator Roy Kwong attempted to talk him down, Leong fell to his death, missing an inflatable cushion set up by firefighters. I don't know if he intended to kill himself.
They set up a cushion for him to land on.
Yeah,
and he missed it barely. I'm pretty sure he wasn't going for death. That's my opinion.
I don't know. I think it might probably seem like they're hard to miss. 20-year-old Education University of Hong Kong student Lo Hu Yan jumped to her death from Ka Fu Estate in Fanling on the 29th of June. She had left 2 notes written in a stairwell wall with red marker and uploaded photos of her note to Instagram. A third suicide occurred the next day when a 29-year-old woman, Zita Wu, jumped from an international financial center. And on the 4th of July, a 28-year-old woman identified as the surname Mac, so she just identified her as Mac, died after jumping off a building in Cheung Wan. So they're just jumping off these buildings in protest because they didn't, some because of the bill itself and some because of the future in a world where this extradition could take place.
Now, it goes to note that, I was talking, me and friends of the people were talking about before we got on the air. I remember when Tiananmen Square, the protests in China actually happened. And this is kind of what they're fighting against, is the things that happened in China. Like a lot of those protesters were never seen or heard from again. And that's hard to swallow if you're somebody who's in their family. You know what I mean? Like, absolutely. You just never see this person again. I mean, that picture of the man staring down the tank was worldwide, but I mean, there's no information about that man. They scrubbed his name from the annals.
He died.
Well, we know that, but I mean, like, he stood for something, and it was like, I mean, in China they minimalize anyone unifying because they don't want that revolution. So, I mean, while I don't condone or commend suicide, I understand the point of having, like I said before, sometimes you have to put a little blood on the pavement to make sure people realize it's really it's necessary. And the message is, like I said before, as sad as the news is, the message is getting received.
Absolutely. So I think that basically what we need to understand too, we need to protest, kind of come up. We need to be aware. Why does it matter that, something going on in Hong Kong and Hong Kong law and what's going on over there? And you've maybe never been to Hong Kong. You don't plan on going to Hong Kong. You don't really care about Hong Kong. Why is it important? Because international solidarity against the hegemonic power is important.
Mm-hmm.
Because hegemonic power is international, and it's going to take an international effort in order to bring them, at Tibet to heal. So we have to fight against the imposition of certain types of cultures, imposition of these certain, military powers and multinational corporations infiltrating and basically marginalizing the sovereignty of these people in these different nations. So it's happening in Hong Kong right now, happening in Venezuela, it's happening in Honduras right now as we speak. It's happening when you're talking about where's that? Right there where India and
Bangladesh, is it? Is it Bangladesh? No, it's Kashmir. No, it's
Kashmir.
Kashmir. That's what
you're talking about. Kashmir. You're talking about, there's infinite. You're talking about Palestine. So there's plenty of different places where where hegemonic power is marginalizing and basically taking away the human rights of people, citizens of Earth. And if you care about your own rights, you care about the spreading of equality, human rights, and things of that nature. Well, then anywhere that these violations are happening, we need to show solidarity. Okay. When I say hegemonic powers, I'm talking about nations with humongous spheres of influence. Right now, when we're talking about, for instance, we're talking about the United States, for instance. The United States is the top hegemon in the world, meaning the huge cultural bastion. Like they can, you can't escape anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah. In the Western Hemisphere, you cannot escape the United States.
Yeah.
Like South America might as well be the United States as well. There, in a lot of ways, you cannot escape the power of the United States.
Yeah.
If you're in your country, a nation, a Caribbean, if the United States wants you to be a certain way, they want you to have certain types of leaders, they can begin to assert their influence, assert their financial influence. They have their military power. They can use those things in order to in order to take away another country's self-determination.
Now, here's a question that I think I know we had talked about it earlier, so I want to make sure we don't miss this before we move on to the next subject. How do you feel about Apple pulling the app that was used by the protesters? You know what I mean? How do you feel about that?
Well, let's do it like this. That's a great way to lead into what you're going to be talking about. Okay. Because that is, again, an example of Chinese power over a business. So go ahead and start into that.
I guess because we had talked about this at length, and what I'm referring to is Apple had, or there was an app that was created that was on and it's still on Android phones. So shout out to Google to avoiding the pressure. But Apple had this app that was there to warn protesters, or at least let people know about where the protests were happening, where the police were coming from, so they wouldn't get hurt. And Apple pulled it. And also, if you aren't aware, the NBA recently has played in China. They played, I think, last night, and it was a very tense situation because at this time, China's really putting a lot of pressure on the corporate powers. They're pressing them to say, "Hey, look, if you don't fold up and hold up with your people talking about how y'all don't like what we're doing over in Hong Kong, you're going to lose our business." And A lot of people, I've had people ask me a couple of questions about whether they think James Harden or put himself in the hot water, or maybe got into a situation where he shouldn't have, or maybe even he may have set back the movement that Colin Kaepernick started. And I had to say, the NBA is a different animal. The NBA is one of those things where I can understand a lot of companies making a statement about it, but the NBA literally has a foothold across the world. It's no longer a national sport. So when you actually have people that work for the company, you have to make sure that you keep all people happy in the company. So I understand James Harden's point of view, because we do have Chinese players. We do have Chinese alumni to the NBA. I mean, Yao Ming is going to go down in the Hall of Fame. He's probably one of the greatest centers of all time, even though he didn't win anything, but he was still one of the first Chinese players. So at this point, we're in bed with the NBA is in bed with them in a very strange and unique way, because there are people that go over to China and make the same, if not more money. They're playing basketball. So it's not like, like in comparison to Colin Kaepernick, it's not the same thing. It's not 32 men. It's not 32. Sorry for just being blunt about it, but it's not 32 white men blackballing one black guy. You know what I mean? When it comes to basketball, it's grown its own legs. And so when the Chinese are, asking the NBA to, pipe down on it, or, back up off it, I can understand that. Now, some of the, but with Apple, it's just not the same. Like, that's more of about how we always talk about capitalism at play. That's China knowing how to use our capitalistic ways against us. That's all there is to it. Because what fear do you have if from losing your money? Because most of the money that's made from Apple, I mean, China's one part of that, but there's tons of countries where people have Apple phones, an Apple Watch. If you're going to lose money from China, that's one thing, but you're an American company. There shouldn't be any outside influence that sways your financial decisions or your ability to give people what they need in a free state, to be honest with you, because it's not like this app was being dispersed in China.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the point for them to even remove an app that helped to aid the safety of people? Or, I can understand Apple's point of view, which is they don't want to be seen as a company that supports.
Apple is a worldwide company.
Well, they are, but
they receive, when you're talking about, I remember somebody was talking about.
But so is the NBA.
When we're talking about tariffs, and when you talk about iPhone, a lot of the parts come from different places in the world.
Yeah, they do.
Some places,
but primarily
come from China. Some come from Israel. So
they're produced in China, which is why they don't want to pull that strain. They don't want to have to pay the extra money to come and produce those here in America in a factory. Where is there one? If we were to Google it, challenge me if you can, because I like to say things off the cuff and shoot them quick. But tell me where they create iPhones, or tell me where they manufacture iPhones in the U.S. I'm gonna tell you the reason that they don't do that is because it costs a lot more money to pay somebody to do such a technical job than it does to do that in China. So they're not looking at. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Let's get into how the Chinese have. Let's start with the NBA story, because I know that's what a lot of people want to talk about, and then let's go from there, and look at some other examples of how the Chinese government has basically.
Well, they sway a lot. They exert a lot of pressure on American companies. But if we're going to talk about the NBA last night, as a matter of fact, the Chinese were going to cancel the game, and that they were going to play on Thursday. But
the Rockets game?
No, the Nets-Lakers game. They're going to cancel that. But begrudgingly, they gave into it because, even the Chinese people were like, they were miffed with us. They were miffed with the NBA about it. But they still went through and watched the game because, again, there's nothing the Chinese have that can replace the American product, period, point blank. They haven't created an Apple phone, because if they did, they wouldn't even produce the Apple phones in China, because they have their own product.
Tyrone gave a great point yesterday on the radio with Ralph Cooper.
Okay.
And it was that the NBA, in a nutshell, basically, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Tyrone, the NBA is basically a place where they've given a lot of breath to the players and to the coaches to express themselves on certain issues. Greg Popovich, for instance.
Oh yeah,
speaking out.
Very
Steve Kerr,
man of the world.
Steve Kerr,
that's a
for
great
instance,
man.
right? Steve
Great
Kerr.
Man of the world.
LeBron James speaks out on a myriad of issues. They actually canceled the location of the All-Star game because of their Charlotte stance on LGBT issues.
Yes, they did.
Things of that nature.
It's a very progressive.
Now that Daryl Morey speaks out, because there is this some financial some kind of financial risk at stake for speaking out.
Mm-hmm.
They are basically trying to force him to amend his statements.
Yeah.
He actually did formally apologize on Twitter. I'm looking at his Twitter feed right now. He actually apologized for that. And just it just seems like hypocritical.
Well, it's very it's very hypocritical from the stance of we're supposed to be a country that has that as the first rule, is the freedom of speech, and to have another country exert pressure upon you to tell your employer that they need to change what they're saying kind of goes against everything that the American culture stands for. So you can't preach it. You can't preach the values and not live the values. You know what I mean? So you're very 100% spot on with that. I want to take a second and respond. Like Ty, that's what we're talking about. What I was talking about with Colin Kaepernick is when I'm talking about the NBA. Like an NBA player can leave the United States and go abroad and go and make money still playing basketball. Period. Josh Childress would have made $100 million. He would not have made that kind of money if he stayed in the NBA. I know that. I'm not saying I'm talented as he was. $100 million was not in his future, and he left the country to go get that. I mean, even Chinese leagues will pay. I mean, Stephon Marbury went and recreated his whole image by going to play in China. Colin Kaepernick cannot do that. It's simply in play. It's not because he can't get a job because there's nowhere else for him to do his expertise. There's nowhere else that he can go and play American football except in America. I mean, you can go to the Canadian Football League if you want to, but I mean, either way it goes, he can't do that
Kaepernick
anywhere
going
else.
To play Canadian football is like, it's like Cornel West taking a high school history teaching job.
Yeah. No disrespect to the CFL, but y'all know.
No respect to high school teachers either.
But y'all know. But yeah, so that's like it's a different stance, and that's why I was saying, like, when it comes to the NBA, you're looking at it has its own, it has a life of its own. So it's a very thin line you got to tread when it comes.
You can go get $1 million in Europe. You talk about Colin Kaepernick?
Colin Kaepernick?
Do they play American football in Europe?
Not anymore. They tried that. They tried that in the early 2000s.
Yeah, Canada for sure. But
that's what we're saying. I mean, like he's saying, he could. But I mean, it's Canadian football.
If you feel like you're worthy to the NFL, you feel like, because let's not make any bones about it. Colin Kaepernick is good enough football player to play in the NFL, the National Football
League. In today's NFL right now, especially with all the injuries to the quarterbacks.
Not even injured. Look, if you line up all the starters and all the backups in the NFL right now, Colin Kaepernick is better than almost all of the backups. If he's not better than any of the stars, even if you said he's not better than the top 32 starters,
still got to be better than the.
Then you got a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers where they lost their number one quarterback. Their number two quarterback has a concussion, is out for this week as well. And their number three quarterback is a rookie. He's playing this week.
No, I mean, but
he's a rookie in his very first game. And then so you got your third string quarterback, and you have an emergency quarterback behind that. You trying to tell me that Colin Kaepernick couldn't contribute to the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I'm not saying and Colin Kaepernick shouldn't have to beg for his job back. With the point he just made, it's simple logic. You know what I mean? If the slave master ain't got no more slaves to go work in the field, you call up that one slave. Come on, it's just that simple.
No, I'm not saying that. I understand what you're saying, Tyrone. When you say if Cornel West was blackballed, I doubt he would beg the blackballer to take him back. But it's just like that. It's just, again, it's like if you have your certain skill set, you're going to go into that market. The market for American football is a very small market.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very small, lucrative market, yes, but it's very small. There's not a lot of places that you can go in order to use your skills for money. And Colin Kaepernick is in conjunction with his agents and any kind of ownership or team, they decide what his skills are worth. Now, I know that if someone wanted to sign Colin Kaepernick, he would get paid probably more than any player in the Canadian League. But again, when you have sponsors that are saying, because there's business people that behind this, and this is the overarching point of this. When you have capitalism, the funny thing is when you do anything for the money, that's great. But when you do anything for things you care about, it might cost you the money. And they can't respect that. It's like you can't respect your passion and your care for other people.
Right.
That costs you money. But if you're willing to do whatever it takes, rob, kill, steal, or destroy for the money, that's where the rewards of capitalism come. And that's why capitalism has to go. Because everything, it stifles every single thing except for the bottom line. And if anything risks that bottom line, they will throw out all humanity, any kind of
what up, my boy?
Love, care, the things that make people and humans and make us different than the animals. You have to throw all of that out the window if it affects the bottom line.
And that brings me to my next point. Like when we're talking about the Rockets specifically, I mean, they genuinely have an invested interest with China. Like their alternate uniforms have Chinese lettering on them. I mean, they're because of the time that they spent with Yao Ming, they have an actual dog in the fight. Like, it's not like they're just speaking about something randomly. It's not like, like I was opinioning with somebody else. Like, it's not like it's the Minnesota Timberwolves stuff jumping up in there apologizing to China. Right. I mean, they literally have an invested interest with the Chinese community here and abroad. So, when it comes to the Rockets, I try, like I said before, I'm not going to go all out and go hard on anybody from the Rockets organization and saying that they're cowering down to the Chinese. But when we're talking about Apple, when we're talking about other companies like that, like McDonald's and things like that, that have very small footholds in China, and that's the corporate influence that's the influence that we see is not just a part of Chinese, it's capitalistic influence. Because you're not going to want to cut that, you're not going to want to lose that money. Nobody is willing to take the hit for the money.
And here we are. iPhones are made in the U.S. according to my dear loving wife. So she's right.
Where? I was gonna say where?
No, she's right though. She said iPhones are made in the U.S. I know.
No, they're created and they're designed in California, but they're manufactured in China.
No, they're. See, the whole thing is this. This is what I learned when they had they were talking about the tariffs and the effect that the tariffs which China had. Okay. A lot of the parts of iPhone, some of them are made in Europe, parts. Some of the parts are made in China. Some of the parts are made in Israel. Some of the parts are made in Michigan. Yeah. Some of the parts are made, they're like parts. And then all these parts from different places arrive at one place. And then they make the phones there.
Yeah.
But I don't know if
I'm just saying it's primarily and predominantly in China. That's why whenever you start talking about whenever you start looking at the stock market, if you ever want to look at who's really getting bullied by China, look at them start talking about trade wars, and then look who starts losing money on their stock. Apple is usually the first company to lose a significant amount of value to their shares because of the amount of money they save by producing their iPhones abroad.
It says the currently assembles the majority of Apple's Apple's iPhones in Shenzhen, China location. That is Foxconn. Foxconn is the one that assembles.
So when we're talking about who
maintains factories in countries across the world, including Thailand, Malaysia, Czech Republic, South Korea, Singapore, and the Philippines. So they make
iPhones everywhere else. I mean, and I'm not even going to say they don't make them here, but like I just told you, if they produce the majority of your product, they have an overwhelming influence on your product. And that's, even the U.S. government is stepping in when it comes to the NBA, but you'll start to see the U.S. government trying to exert their influence in the situation when it shouldn't be, because capitalism is about business. It's not about politics. And I think when we're talking about an NBA player stepping up and saying something and then a GM coming up behind him and doubling down on it, That's not bad for the NBA to do. I mean, at this point, even the NBA is like, we're not even doing any more we're not even doing any more media with China until we figure this whole thing out. The NBA has integrity, at least in their brand, to say, hey, we get it. We want to be a part of your culture. We want to accept your people in. We have in the past, but we're not going to let you demonize something that we built for the last 40 or 50 years.
Well, also though, but ultimately, when you're talking about the Hong Kong protest, it's like this. There has to be a line when we're talking about these people saying things. Like when Morley says something about solidarity with Hong Kong, there has to be a time where he's speaking for the NBA, the GM, and a time where he's not. It can't be 20. It can't be a 24-hour thing. Okay, he can't be. When you go home from your job, you might be at work, and there's certain things you won't say, talk about, or do.
Right.
When you go home in your living room, you can talk about whatever the hell you want. There has to be a time. There has to be a time where Daryl Morley is in his living room and he can say whatever the hell he wants.
Where he's Daryl Morley, the human being, and not Daryl Morley, the GM. I agree with you 100% on that.
Absolutely, and there has to be. I don't know. There has to be a way of separating that. He has to be. You know what I mean? And that he shouldn't be Daryl Morey, the Rockets GM, 24/7 of his life,
or James Harden, the NBA player, every minute of his life. I agree.
Right.
Or a Colin Kaepernick, even every day or every moment of his life. I mean, not granted, he did it on the job, which, you know, if that happened anywhere else, if somebody filed a protest in any other job in America and they got fired for it, they probably sued the pants off the company.
He
did, and he won.
Sit at home, relax on his
now on that though,
and tweet something and be able to say he wants.
That's the one thing I'd say that he should move on for, is because he whipped the NFL's ass and he got paid. Now, I don't know too many people who go and sue their employer, win, and then want to go back to work. That's a horse of another day. You know what I mean? Like, that's a whole other day. But
right. It says, so the NBA, Tyrone brings up a great point. It says the NBA is saying, hey, human rights violations are fine if you're paying us.
But here's the thing, though, and that's why I keep drilling down on the fact that they shouldn't have to even say that. You know what I mean?
Would the Chinese agree with you that these are human rights violations? See, the thing is, the situation is complex when you think about the fact that there's two different ways of looking at it. When I looked at some of these Hong Kong videos on YouTube, what was going on, were posted by people in Hong Kong that were, white protests. There's Chinese people posting on the comments that are very upset with Hong Kong. Regular people. There are people in Hong Kong that agree with the Chinese. And they all have their own reasons.
It's not black and white.
But the whole point is this: it's a damn shame that when it comes down to the money, Chinese businesses will say, you know what, we'll take our money out of the situation.
Well, it's not even the Chinese business; it's the Chinese government, because they're really honestly the ones that are throttling the businesses. It's like because you're only allowed to trade with China through the government. That's how they've set it up. So it's not like here where, you know, you can come and set up trade. You can set up trade without having the government get involved until it's time for taxation. But in China, from the initial articles of corporation, you have to have the Chinese government involved. And a lot of businesses are falling to the sway of that. And it's sad, but again, you don't have to have the money. And you're like that's what I agree with you too. I mean, like, if human rights violations are good by it, then I don't think that the NBA players feel that way. I honestly don't. Outside of Houston, because I haven't seen too many people pipe up about it. And I mean, it was kind of interesting because the one person I would have imagined to have an opinion on it was actually in China playing. So,
you know what? The one person I would suspect would have an opinion on it, but I haven't heard speak on it, is President Donald Trump. He has an opinion on everything.
Well, I mean, I think his thing has been since the beginning of this whole trade war with China is, I'll just hit him in the pocketbook, because he knows he can affect. Like, he's understanding it just like me, and you probably understand it, that their business model is to make government first, then, like, it's government first, you pay us, and then we'll let you get paid, or whatever the case may be. So his thing is, well, fuck it, I'll just make getting the money harder for you. But it's a double-edged sword, because they swing it right back at us. But this goes beyond that, because now you're actually influencing companies in the United States to tell their employees to go against what they've been given as their culture, what their rights are. You know what I mean? Like, if you're telling me it's going to cost, like, I can't imagine Daryl Morley having a conversation with James Harden. Like, I need you to apologize. This is going to cost us money if you don't. That's fucked up. You know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine, you know what I'm saying, how that conversation would even go. Because if you stand for something, and I don't know James Harden personally enough to be able to say, you know what I mean? Oh, well, right. But it's a basketball player. So I treat them like movie stars. Sometimes they say shit where I'm just like, huh. But even the fact that he had the comment, I don't know him personally enough to know if he really felt that way, but it felt like it looked forced. It looked like it had been rehearsed. It looked like it was something that they had discussed before he said it. So again, when we're talking about Chinese influence from the government on American corporations or American employees, there should be a line there. That's just my opinion, 100%. There should definitely be a line between what anyone should have to say in order to save the bottom line, because I don't imagine losing that much money from China is going to hurt the bottom line, but I could be wrong.
Right. Yeah, Tyrone said he just spoke on it. Yeah, I just kind of looked that up right now. He did say we said the Hong Kong protests are going to take care of themselves. So Captain Obvious.
But again, I mean, if you're an NBA player and you know you got large deals, large contracts, and you don't want to put yourself on notice, that's a very, very good way of saying that. I would have said it. That's exactly, matter of fact, that's exactly how I would have said that. Shit. That's as vanilla and ambiguous as you can get. They'll take care of themselves. What does that mean? It means what it means.
It's gonna happen.
It'll sort itself out. Watch. Sooner or later, it'll all be over.
Okay. So we're about to get out of here. Look out. I don't know. I haven't heard anything yet, but I should be in a few minutes on this debate with Greeland Fee on immigration that I set up. He wanted it. So
I'm tuning into that simply because I have a feeling that is going to be quite entertaining.
I'm actually going to be sitting right here doing it. So, of course, that's why you're tuning in. I'm at your house. But check it out, man. It's going to be interesting. Keep it locked right here. Soapbox Heroes Network, man. And we will try to make sure you're informed on a very important issue of immigration. But if you haven't, like, share, subscribe. We're approaching 1,000 subscribers.
Yes, we're getting there.
Yes, and we're trying to get there. What happens when you get 1,000 subscribers? Basically, once you get 1,000 subscribers, you get $4,000 hours worth of view time. What happens is we can now monetize videos. Now, I know monetization in YouTube is not really that cool of a deal, but sometimes
gotta keep the lights on.
It helps people make better videos. Also, you know, if you guys want, so the best way you can support us at this point in time is just to subscribe.
I mean, yeah, it's just a couple of clicks to get to.
Make sure you hit the notification bell as well. That way, anytime me, D, Tyrone, Prince, or anybody else on the Soapbox Heroes Network has uploaded a video or goes live, you are going to be right there on the cutting edge of history, Soapbox Hero history.
And as always, you know, we love y'all participation. We love everybody for showing up. Thank you for coming out. Shout out to all those that was on Facebook Live with us too.
Thank you for our Facebook Live fam. We love you guys.
Like I said, yeah, you know the name, Soapbox Heroes channel. Look us up on YouTube as always. And tune in to my boy Ty's show. What's the call sign? I know it's in Houston, but I know some of y'all got Sirius FM and all that.
KHSX Houston 101.5.
So yeah, all my family down in Texas, give my boy a holler and give him a lookout. One last thing I wanted to talk about before we got out of here. Very interesting story. I just wanted to share this with the world just to give y'all something to laugh about. Young man, forget his name now. Probably won't be important to the story. But he, 23-year-old man, walked into a Dollar General with a handgun and proceeded to wave it around and was summarily shot by one of the employees. To put the robbery to bed and killed him.
It was a robbery?
It was a robbery. Tried to rob. Now, he had a history of doing this. Keep that in mind. He's had a history of doing this. But this one particular time, somebody decided to bring a gun to work to protect the workplace and themselves and shot his ass dead. Now, that's not funny. What is funny and stupid at the same time is that when they interviewed his sister and his brother, they both said, and I quote, it wasn't all his fault that he was part of the robbery. The clerk that had the gun should be in trouble because who the fuck brings a gun to work? All you're supposed to do when you see a gun get waved around is call the police. So all I'm gonna say is, with as much of the world that we deal with, keep it classy, y'all. Don't get on TV and embarrass yourself. Don't. Look, we just put a cop in jail. No, don't do that.
When a stick up goes wrong?
Yeah, when a stick up goes horribly wrong,
said,
and when an interview goes worse, because literally the family was sitting there like, I don't understand why they shot him.
They're probably really grieving, and it is what it is. Okay.
But that was their second person in their family that got shot.
And now they're sticking him down in the ground.
Look. If that was
no sympathy for dumb criminals.
If you go out and that was the 4th or 5th robbery and you got shot, chances are you were in the wrong profession and it was gonna catch up with you anyway at some point. So what they should be doing is, instead of going on TV trying to find reason to blame somebody for defending themselves, maybe you work with your other 8 siblings that are left and nobody goes into a liquor store or rob shit. Yep. How about that? Get a job.
Next week on Best Case Scenario podcast, I think we're just gonna tie together a lot of the stuff that's been going on with impeachment.
Yeah.
Is there in fact a smoking gun between the text messages, the transcripts, and the witnesses coming forward? Now we will find out. We'll be able to get that directly to you guys.
Oh yeah, and Marie and Ms. Yovanovitch, I got my eyes on you. She just testified. If y'all don't know who that is, we'll talk about that next week too. But he says smoking gun. I think she's a silver bullet, but we'll see.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. And until then, behave.
And again, we love you. Have a great day, and the best is still yet to come.
All right.